The ship shuddered violently, its warning lights flickering in a rhythm that seemed almost musical if you ignored the sparks flying from the console. He yelped, gripping the armrest of the pilot chair, only to realize the chair had a tendency to float half a meter off the floor every time the turbulence hit. "Okay," he muttered, talking to the ship because admitting fear to himself was out of the question. "Not my fault this time. Definitely the ship's." The autopilot interface blinked back at him with what he could swear was a smug little wink. He jabbed at the controls, sending the craft careening through what appeared to be a wormhole. Somewhere in the distance, stars twisted and bent as if the universe were showing off its watercolor skills. The experience was nauseating, magical, and, from the look on his own reflection in the cracked visor, terrifyingly comical. When the ship finally coughed and spat him into a stable orbit, he blinked at the planet below. It was larger than Earth, its surface covered in forests that shimmered in hues that hurt his brain to name. Floating islands hung lazily above the land, tethered by threads of light that pulsed faintly, almost like veins of some planetary organism. He pressed a hand to his forehead and muttered, "Well, I didn't sign up for a guided tour of the galaxy today." The ship, of course, ignored him entirely and began issuing polite beeps that translated roughly to, "Welcome, human. Try not to crash again." He stumbled out, boots clanging against the landing platform, which promptly tilted at a mildly inconvenient angle, sending him rolling gently into a wall of soft, glowing vines. "Yep," he muttered, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. "Definitely not home." A hovering drone appeared, sleek and angular, with eyes that seemed to flicker between suspicion and curiosity. It beeped in a way that suggested both a formal greeting and a side-eye. He waved at it uncertainly, eliciting a mechanical chuckle from its speakers. "Ah, don't worry, I'm friendly," he said. It remained silent but gestured toward a crystalline pathway that twisted upward, like a staircase made of frozen starlight. There was no option to refuse. The palace loomed above him, enormous but elegant, with towers that spiraled into the sky and walls that caught light in waves of color. A door opened before he could knock and she appeared. He blinked. She was tall, her figure human-like in every way that mattered but the ears, those long, expressive ears, twitched slightly as she approached. They gave her an almost feline grace, but the smile she wore was distinctly human, teasing, and impossible to read. "You're awake," she said lightly, her voice a melody that could make a drowning man believe he had lungs again. "I trust the ship was accommodating." He coughed nervously. It has personality issues, and apparently taste in dramatic entrances." She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to resonate with the building itself, causing the floor to hum beneath him. "You'll find that is considered normal here." She waved a hand and plates of floating fruit drifted toward him, orbiting lazily like tiny moons. "Eat," she said. "Try the durian. It screams less than it looks." He picked one up, sniffed cautiously, and made a face that suggested the smell was a philosophical challenge. "If it screams, I can't hear it," he muttered, biting into the fruit anyway. She twitched her ears, a small gesture of amusement. "Your bravery is noted." As they walked through hallways that curved and shimmered unnaturally, he kept tripping over the invisible boundaries of gravity. She either ignored it or didn't notice, moving with the fluidity of someone who had learned to treat the laws of physics like polite suggestions. "You have to admit," he said, trying to regain some dignity, "this place has a flair for, spatial irony." She tilted her head, ears flicking, and said nothing, which he interpreted as agreement. A passing robot servant offered him a towel, which he waved off, then immediately realized he had no idea what to do with the towel in zero gravity. He wrapped it around himself like a misguided superhero. "Perfect," he muttered. "Now I look like a cosmic mime." Dinner was unconventional. Drinks floated in midair until he jabbed at one, and it ricocheted across the room, narrowly missing a small chandelier of sentient crystals that blinked in alarm. She laughed again, the sound bouncing from the walls in tiny arcs of light. "You are surprisingly clumsy for a human," she said, amused but not unkind. "I like it." He grimaced at the compliment. "I've been told clumsy and courageous are sometimes interchangeable in space," he replied. She twitched her ears again, a gesture that might have been a chuckle or a warning. He decided to call it a compliment. Later, she led him to a balcony where the forests below shimmered like living gemstones. "Most guests would faint or at least ask for a bed," she said, leaning on the crystalline railing. "But you asked about the plants." He swallowed nervously, trying to hide how much he wanted to ask about everything at once. "Yeah," he said. "Curiosity's cheaper than therapy and less likely to explode." She tilted her head, ears quivering in delight at his joke, and he realized she genuinely found humor in human absurdity. By the time night fell, or at least what counted for night on a planet with 3 moons and a sky that changed color every hour, he understood something important. He was far from home, undeniably lost, and yet somehow exactly where he was meant to be. She didn't offer answers, not yet. She simply gestured to a seat suspended in midair. "Rest," she said. "Tomorrow we will see if your perspective is useful." He plopped down, flailing slightly as gravity played musical chairs. She watched, ears flicking with amusement, and he laughed despite himself. In a place full of alien technology, strange floating creatures, and impossible views, it was the small moments, the fruit, the flying towel, the joke about the chandelier, that made him feel, against all odds, welcome. And as the stars of the alien world shimmered above him, he realized that losing his way had led him to someone who might just change everything he thought he knew about the universe. The morning light, or whatever counted as morning on a planet with a sun that hummed softly in shades of green and blue, caught him as he clumsily untangled himself from the floating hammock she had thoughtfully provided. Gravity, he decided, was like a rebellious child here, inconsistent, moody, and prone to sending him bumping into walls at the worst possible moments. He rose with all the dignity of a man who had just tripped over 3 invisible steps and narrowly avoided turning his breakfast into a low-orbit disaster. She was already waiting, standing with her long ears twitching slightly, arms crossed, and a look on her face that could be both warning and amusement depending on how he interpreted the tilt of her head. "You move like the planet is trying to kiss you," she said. "It's polite to resist." He blinked at her, trying not to look like a human-shaped tumbleweed. "I'll take it under advisement," he said, pointing to the floor, the ceiling, the walls, everywhere really, because he was still unsure which direction gravity was truly aiming. She only laughed, a soft musical sound that made even the humming sun seem quieter in respect. "Follow me. Breakfast is alive today." He hesitated. "Alive?" She flicked her wrist and plates of floating fruit and pastries began to orbit themselves, chirping softly in harmonic tones. "They complain if you ignore them," she said with a straight face. He looked down at a donut that blinked at him with 2 small, sugared eyes. "Great," he muttered. "Even pastries are judging me now." After a precarious meal where he avoided offending a particularly sensitive croissant, she led him through the palace into the gardens. They weren't merely gardens. They were a labyrinth of singing plants, bioluminescent vines that rearranged themselves when touched, and pools that rippled into other dimensions if you stared too long. He stumbled into a flower that sighed in relief when he backed away, muttering something about not crushing delicate planetary life forms. She watched, ears flicking, and quipped, "You're better at diplomacy than most of my council." He raised an eyebrow. "That's faint praise, isn't it?" She shook her head. "Not when the council includes sentient moss that votes on policy." They arrived at a hall of archives that seemed alive, walls flowing with pulsing light that contained layers of knowledge older than human civilization. "We keep everything," she explained. "And by everything, I mean everything." He glanced at a display of stars being born and promptly reached to touch it, only to trigger a miniature supernova in his palm. He yelped and yanked his hand back. She laughed, ears twitching in delight. "Careful," she said, "some of it bites." "Bites?" he asked, watching the tiny explosion fizzle into harmless sparks. Yeah, she replied. Some of it just wants attention, others, well, worse. As he fumbled through holographic star maps and gravity-defying manuscripts, he noticed her observing him closely. The subtle shifts of her long ears gave away her thoughts more than her words. She wasn't just studying him, she was testing him, gauging how a human would interpret the anomalies of her world. So, you want my opinion on what? He asked nervously, suddenly aware of the gravity of her attention. She smiled, seemingly amused by his hesitation. On everything, she said simply. But start with the gardens. Their exploration became a combination of trial, error, and comic misadventure. He tripped over invisible roots that stretched like elastic, almost toppled into a pond that reflected not his face but his thoughts, and somehow managed to trigger a choir of floating orchids into a minor frenzy of song. I swear, he said, hands in the air as flowers circled him like a living baton-twirling ensemble, I am not a threat to plant life. She twitched her ears, clearly restraining laughter, and offered him a hand. I believe you, mostly. After what he could only describe as a gentle gauntlet of alien education, she finally led him to a circular chamber where gravity twisted in waves, forming patterns that made him feel like he was walking on liquid glass. This is one of the interactive archives, she said. It responds to thought patterns. He froze. You mean it reads my mind? She nodded. It's polite, it won't gossip. He hesitated, imagining what a polite but gossipy archive might look like, and promptly had an idea that triggered a small burst of light and a loud pop, sending both of them spinning gently in a slow orbit. Well, he panted, it likes me already. She laughed, her ears flicking as the sound echoed in the chamber. Or it's just confused. Either way, it's endearing. Throughout the day, as they navigated through archives, floating corridors, and living gardens, he noticed her long ears moving with subtlety, twitching when she was amused, flicking when she was curious, and occasionally flattening in a gesture he didn't yet understand. Humor became their glue. He mispronounced alien words, activated accidental light shows, and narrowly avoided setting off a cascade of reactive bioluminescent moss, and she laughed each time, sometimes teasing, sometimes genuinely delighted. It was exhausting, confusing, and oddly comforting. By evening, they had arrived at the edge of the planet's central energy hub, a glowing core that pulsed like a heartbeat. She stopped him, letting him observe silently. Most of my people ignore it, she said softly. They see the glow, they nod, and they go about their business. You notice things differently. He squinted. I notice things differently because I trip over them. She smiled, ears twitching in amusement. That, and because you ask questions no one else remembers to ask. As they floated there, watching the energy pulse and the forests below shimmer with impossible colors, he realized that her invitation wasn't just about hospitality. There was something at stake, something hidden beneath the elegance and humor, and he was part of it, whether he understood how or not. He looked at her, tall, graceful, her ears swaying with subtle emotion, and for the first time felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. The planet was alive, the stakes were unknown, and somehow, amid singing plants and orbiting fruit, he was beginning to understand that he might be the unexpected key to something far larger than himself. The pulse of the planet's core echoed beneath their feet, a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to communicate with them directly. He watched it, trying to make sense of what was happening, and tripped over his own gravity-shifting shoes, landing on his hands with a muffled thud. I am definitely going to leave a mark in the history books, or at least on this floor, he muttered. She didn't laugh immediately, just tilted her head, long ears twitching in what he had learned to recognize as curiosity mixed with amusement. It's a hazard to underestimate human resilience, she said calmly, offering him a hand. He took it, and the moment their fingers touched, the floor beneath them rippled with light, as if acknowledging some small, unexpected connection. They moved deeper into the core chamber, which was no longer just a hub of energy, but a labyrinth of floating pathways and crystalline structures that bent the laws of physics in ways he had long since stopped questioning. "So this is it?" he asked, dodging a strand of energy that sparked like tiny lightning. "The big cosmic secret." She smiled faintly, ears quivering, and said, "The secret is that it's not so much secret as fragile. The core is weakening, and if it collapses—" Her voice trailed off, leaving him to imagine everything from planetary implosions to angry sentient trees. "We die?" he asked bluntly. "Or at least the planet dies." She nodded and he winced. "Fantastic. I get lost in space and accidentally enroll in planetary life insurance." The humor didn't die there. As they approached the first of the energy conduits, he managed to activate a holographic control panel upside down, sending a beam of light bouncing across the chamber and narrowly missing a hovering drone, which screamed something in a language that sounded suspiciously like indignation. She raised an eyebrow. "Not subtle," she observed. "I prefer methods with flair," he replied. She twitched her ears and shook her head, letting a small smile slip through. "You are unpredictable," she said, and he felt a strange kind of pride in that. They traced the core's energy pathways, which twisted like a cosmic roller coaster, and he began to notice anomalies she had hinted at. Sections of energy were slowing, some pulsing out of sync, almost like the planet itself was snoring at inappropriate moments. He pointed at one and said, "Here, this one's asleep or plotting something evil, hard to tell which." She laughed aloud, the sound reverberating through the energy streams. "You have an interesting way of seeing things," she said. "Most of my people would never notice this. They are too accustomed to routine." He shrugged, half proud, half nervous. Sometimes routine needs a clumsy human to trip over it and point out the cracks. As they worked together, she taught him how to interact with the energy using a combination of gestures, thought, and subtle touch. He failed spectacularly at first, accidentally creating a miniature energy vortex that sucked a pile of floating documents into a chaotic orbit. "Oops," he said. She just raised her hand and the vortex froze, spinning harmlessly like a glittering mobile. "It's the effort that counts," she said, "and occasionally the mistakes." He grinned. "Then I'm invaluable." Hours passed, or maybe minutes. He had lost track, as time itself bent and twisted inside the chamber. Eventually, they reached the source of the disruption. A strand of corrupted energy tangled with a forgotten shard of alien technology, something abandoned for centuries but still leaking instability into the core. "I see it," he said, pointing. "That little thing." She nodded, her ears flattening slightly in concentration. "That little thing is everything," she said. Together they untangled it, combining her precision with his unorthodox improvisation. He pressed buttons in ways that made no sense, yet somehow worked, and she manipulated energy threads with a grace that made the laws of physics bend politely around her. Finally, the core stabilized, glowing steadily and sending pulses of vibrant energy into the forests, the oceans, and the floating islands above. He stumbled back, catching his breath. "I think we just saved a planet," he said, grinning in disbelief. She tilted her head, ears twitching, and allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "And you," she said softly, "helped me see it in a way no one else could. That is why you were invited here." He blinked, suddenly understanding. He hadn't just wandered into her world by accident. He had been exactly what the planet needed, an outsider who could notice what insiders could not. They exited the chamber, moving through halls that now shimmered more brightly, alive with energy and restored life. He looked at her, tall, elegant, her ears flicking subtly with emotions he had learned to read, and realized he felt different too. He wasn't just a lost traveler anymore. He was someone who could face the unknown, laugh at it, stumble through it, and still make a difference. Humor, he thought, was more than survival, it was connection, a bridge even across worlds. As they stepped onto the balcony overlooking the glowing forests and floating islands, he quipped, "So, this is what happens when you accidentally RSVP to a cosmic party." She laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made even the floating lights twinkle in amusement. "Something like that," she said, ears twitching in a small, approving gesture. He looked down at the forests, the rivers, the pulsing life, and felt a warm certainty that he had grown in ways he hadn't expected. He had arrived as a lost, clumsy human. He would leave as someone who understood both fragility and resilience, humor and seriousness, and the strange, beautiful ways the universe connected life across the stars. Finally, she handed him a small floating orb of light. "For remembrance," she said, "and to remind you that sometimes the universe chooses its helpers in ways that defy all expectations." He took it, feeling the weightlessness of it in his hand, and grinned. "I guess getting lost wasn't all bad, huh?" She tilted her head, ears quivering like a smile, and replied, "No, not all bad at all." And for the first time in a long while, he truly believed it. The stars shimmered above them, steady and endless, and he knew he would never look at the universe the same way again.